Kursk, the 50 tanks that shattered an army. The vast steppes of southern Russia stretched endlessly under a sweltering July sun in 1943. A colossal force of steel and fire was about to collide, shaking the foundations of World War II. The Battle of Kursk wasn't just a clash. It was the largest tank engagement in history, where nearly 6,000 armored beasts roared into combat. At its heart lay a myth-shrouded moment. 50 Soviet tanks charging into oblivion, shattering a German army and turning the Eastern Front forever. How did this desperate gamble cripple Hitler's Wehrmacht and seal the Red Army's path to Berlin? This is the epic tale of armored warfare's ultimate spectacle, where technology met tenacity in a thunderous symphony of destruction. By the spring of 1943, the Eastern Front had become a graveyard of empires. Germany's blitzkrieg, once unstoppable, lay broken after the catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad. In February 1943, Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus surrendered his 6th Army, costing Hitler over 300,000 men and shattering the myth of German invincibility. The Red Army, bloodied but unbowed, launched a winter counteroffensive that pushed the Wehrmacht back hundreds of miles. By March, a massive bulge, known as the Kursk salient, protruded 100 miles westward into German lines, stretching 150 miles from north to south around the city of Kursk. This salient, centered on a vital rail hub, became the stage for the war's defining armored showdown. Adolf Hitler, desperate to regain the initiative, saw Kursk as his last chance. Operation Citadel, planned in March 1943, aimed to pinch off the salient with a pincer movement. From the north, Field Marshal Günther von Kluge's 9th Army would strike south from Orel. From the south, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's 4th Panzer Army would thrust north from Kharkov. The two forces would meet at Kursk, encircling and annihilating up to 100 Soviet divisions. Hitler believed this victory would shorten the front, free up troops for the West, and force Stalin to the negotiating table. The Wehrmacht assembled a juggernaut for Citadel, over 777,000 men, 2,251 tanks and assault guns, 70% of Germany's Eastern Front armor, and 7,417 artillery pieces massed for the assault. Elite SS panzer divisions like the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler and Das Reich spearheaded the attack with cutting-edge Panthers and Tigers. The Panther, a 45-ton medium tank with sloped armor and a high-velocity 70-mm gun, promised to outmatch the Soviet T-34. The Tiger I, a 57-ton behemoth with an 88-mm cannon, could penetrate any foe at 2,000 yards. Yet, production delays meant only 329 Panthers and 200 Tigers were ready by July, many plagued by mechanical gremlins like overheating engines and fragile tracks. The Luftwaffe committed 2,000 aircraft, but its strength had waned after Stalingrad and losses in North Africa. Only 25% of day fighters remained on. The East siphoned off to counter Allied bombings in the West. Hitler delayed Citadel repeatedly, from May to July, to incorporate these new tanks, giving the Soviets precious time. German intelligence, hampered by ultra-intercepts shared by the Allies, underestimated Soviet preparations. They estimated 1,500 Red Army tanks in the salient. The truth was far grimmer. On the Soviet side, Marshal Georgy Zhukov orchestrated a masterpiece of foresight. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park, via the Lucy spy ring, leaked Citadel's plans to Stalin in April. Zhukov convinced the Supreme High Command, Stavka, to forgo a preemptive strike. Instead, they would bleed the Germans dry in deep defenses, then unleash a devastating counteroffensive. It would be better to make the enemy exhaust himself against our defenses and knock out his tanks, Zhukov argued. Stalin agreed, consulting frontline commanders from April 12 to 15. The Kursk defenses were unprecedented. 8 million anti-tank mines, 500,000 personnel mines, and 1,000 kilometers of trenches formed 8 defensive belts up to 200 miles deep. The first belt featured razor wire, minefields, and concrete dragon's teeth obstacles. Behind them lay artillery, anti-tank guns and tank-killing ditches. The Central Front, under General Konstantin Rokossovsky, guarded the north with 335,000 men and 800 tanks. The Voronezh Front, led by General Nikolai Vatutin, defended the south with 625,000 troops and 1,700 tanks. The Steppe Front, under General Ivan Konev, waited in reserve with 573,000 men and very 400 tanks. Soviet armor emphasized quantity over quality. Over 5,000 tanks massed, including 3,000 T-34s and SU-152s, reliable workhorses with sloped armor and 76mm guns. New T-34-85s with 85mm guns arrived too late, but SU-152 beast killers, heavy assault guns with 152mm howitzers, lurked in ambush. Light T-60 and T-70 scouts screened the lines, while KV-1 heavies anchored key sectors. The Red Air Force fielded 3,500 planes, outnumbering the Luftwaffe and ready to contest the skies. Deception operations like dummy airfields fooled German reconnaissance. 29 of 35 Luftwaffe raids in June hit phantoms. As July dawned, tension gripped the salient. German troops, delayed by Allied landings in Sicily on July 10th, chafed under the heat. Soviet sappers worked feverishly, fortifying positions while partisans disrupted rail lines. Hitler, obsessed with Citadel's success, ignored warnings from generals like Manstein, who favored a mobile defense. On July 4th, final preparations ended. At 2:30 a.m. on July 5th, Soviet artillery preemptively shelled German positions guided by intelligence. The Battle of Kursk had begun. The German offensive erupted at dawn on July 5th. In the north, Model's 9th Army slammed into Rokossovsky's lines near Ponary. Tigers and Ferdinands, massive 65-ton tank destroyers with 88mm guns, smashed through the first belt, claiming dozens of T-34s, but Soviet anti-tank ditches and mines bogged them down. Of 90 Ferdinands committed, 40 were immobilized by day's end. Ponary became a Stalingrad in miniature, with house-to-house fighting and anti-tank guns dueling at point-blank range. Model advanced just 6 miles in 5 days, losing 25,000 men and 1,000 tanks. In the south, Manstein's 4th Panzer Army fared better initially. The SS Panzer Corps, under General Paul Hauser, pierced Vatutin's defenses near Belgorod. Panthers and Tigers led the charge, their guns punching through T-34s at 1,500 yards. By July 7th, they captured the height of Hill 2 erupted, overlooking the Donets River. Soviet counterattacks with Il-2 Sturmoviks, ground attack planes with 37mm cannons, inflicted heavy losses, destroying 500 Luftwaffe aircraft on the ground. Manstein's probe reached 25 miles into the salient, but at a cost. 50,000 casualties and 700 tanks disabled. The southern front intensified as German panzers ground forward. The XLA Panzer Corps, with Mark IVs and Panthers, tangled with Soviet tank brigades near Verkopenia. T-34s, faster and more maneuverable, ambushed from hull-down positions, their sloped armor deflecting shots. German crews, veterans of Barbarossa, marveled at the Red Army's tenacity. "These Russians fight like devils," one Tiger commander radioed. By July 10th, the Germans breached the second belt, but Soviet reserves, fresh T-34s from Konev's steppe front, plugged the gaps. Friction mounted on both sides. German tanks broke down at alarming rates. Panthers suffered transmission failures, stranding 156 of 200 in the first week. Soviet minefields claimed 300 vehicles, while Katyusha rocket barrages, nicknamed Stalin's organs, saturated advance routes. Luftwaffe sorties dropped from 2,000 to 500 daily, contested by Yakovlev Yak-9 fighters. Manstein urged a breakthrough toward Prokhorovka, a rail junction 35 miles from Kursk. Hitler, distracted by Sicily, hesitated, but Citadel pressed on. The tempo accelerated as German panzers neared the salient's heart. On July 11th, the SS Leibstandarte Division captured Hill 252, but Soviet artillery zeroed in, turning it into a slaughterhouse. Vatutin committed the 1st Tank Army, its T-34s clashing in swirling melees. Dust clouds choke the air, visibility dropping to 50 yards. Crews fired blindly, hulls grinding in the chaos. German Tigers, with superior optics, picked off foes at range, but Soviet numbers overwhelmed isolated units. By nightfall, the front stabilized, both sides exhausted and low on fuel. Tensions peaked on July 12th, the battle's fiery crescendo. Manstein's panzers, exhausted but intact, pushed for Prokhorovka. The T-34s SS Panzer Corps, with 250 tanks, aimed to seize the town and sever Soviet supply lines. Vatutin, forewarned, unleashed Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army. 800 tanks, mostly T-34s, surging from reserve. What followed was armored Armageddon, a clash immortalized and mythologized as history's largest tank battle. The fields east of Prokhorovka erupted in thunder. At 8:30 a.m., Rotmistrov's tanks charged across open steppe, a human wave of steel. Soviet doctrine emphasized massed assaults, but terrain favored the defenders. Sunflowers 8 feet tall concealed German anti-tank guns. Live Standardy Tigers, hull down behind ridges, opened fire at 1,000 yards. T-34s brewed up in flames, their crews bailing out into minefields. Steel against steel, a Soviet tanker later recalled, but ours broke first. The assault faltered into frenzy. Soviet tanks, low on fuel after a 200-mile forced march, bunched up, easy targets for German 88-unity guns. Panthers, with stabilized turrets, traversed swiftly, claiming 20 kills each. Yet, Soviet SU-85 tank destroyers, 85mm guns on T-34 chassis, returned fire, penetrating Tiger Glacis at 500 yards. The clash devolved into point-blank duels. T-34s ramming Panthers, crews firing pistols through hatches. Smoke and wreckage choked the battlefield. 50 Soviet tanks, isolated in a ravine, charged headlong into the SS lines. These 50 tanks, elements of the 170th Tank Brigade, became legend. Outnumbered and outgunned, they slammed into German positions near Storozhevoye village. T-34s traded shots with Ferdinands at 50 yards, their 70mm shells glancing off heavy armor. One tanker, Guards Lieutenant Alexei Petrenko, rammed a Tiger, detonating both in a fireball. The charge bought time, halting the SS advance for hours. German logs noted fanatical resistance, with 30 of the 50 tanks destroyed, but inflicting disproportionate damage. Myth soon enveloped the moment. Soviet propaganda, eager for heroes, inflated Prokhorovka to 1,500 tanks, clashing in a death ride. General Pavel Rotmistrov's memoirs claimed 700 or 800 tanks per side, with Germans losing 400. Western histories echoed this, dubbing it the war's greatest tank battle. But archives, opened post-Cold War, reveal the truth. Around 600 Soviet versus 200 German tanks engaged, with Soviet losses at 300 vehicles, German at 80. The 50 tanks weren't a myth. They were a desperate, pivotal stand that blunted the SS spearhead. The clash at Prokhorovka marked Citadel's high-water mark. Manstein's panzers, fuel-starved and ammo low, ground to a halt. Soviet losses were grievous, over 200 tanks burning, but the line held. Hitler, informed of Allied landings in Sicily, halted the offensive on July 13th, diverting panzers to Italy. Citadel is over, he told his generals, his voice hollow. The Wehrmacht had advanced 25 miles, at the cost of 50,000 men and 700 tanks. The Soviet riposte was swift and merciless. On July 12th, even as Prokhorovka raged, Zhukov launched Operation Kutuzov in the north. Rokossovsky's forces smashed Model's exhausted 9th Army, liberating Orel by August 5th. In the south, Operation Rumyantsev followed on August 3rd. Konev's steppe front, reinforced by fresh T-34s, encircled Kharkov. Manstein's counterattacks faltered. By August 23rd, Kharkov fell, costing Germany another 50,000 casualties. The counteroffensives cascaded across the front. Soviet troops, morale soaring, pushed 300 miles westward, recapturing Smolensk by September. German retreats turned routes, with panzer divisions reduced to 20% strength. The Luftwaffe, down 1,000 planes, ceded air superiority. Hitler's dream of a shortened front evaporated. The salient reformed, larger than before. Kursk's toll was apocalyptic. Germany lost 200,000 men, 700 tanks, and 1,600 aircraft, irreplaceable blows. The Soviets suffered 800,000 casualties and 6,000 tanks, but their factories churned out 1,000 T-34s monthly. The Wehrmacht's elite Panzer Corps, once 70% of Eastern Front armor, were gutted, their veterans irreplaceable. The battle redefined armored warfare. Kursk proved mass defenses could bleed offensives dry. Soviet deep battle doctrine, reserves held back for counterstrikes, triumphed over blitzkrieg. Technologically, the T-34's reliability outshone the Panther's teething pains. The clash exposed tanks' vulnerabilities. Mines, artillery, and air power claimed more than duels. Kursk shattered Germany's Eastern Front strategy. No more grand offensives. The Wehrmacht shifted to elastic defense, yielding ground to preserve forces. Soviet momentum snowballed. Kiev fell in November. Leningrad relieved in January 1944. By D-Day, Zhukov's armies stood at Poland's border, the red tide unstoppable. Hitler's generals, like Guderian, later admitted, Kursk was the beginning of the end. The legacy of those 50 tanks endures. In Prokhorovka's fields, memorials honor the charge that halted an army. Kursk wasn't just a battle. It was the Eastern Front's Rubicon, where Soviet steel and will crossed into dominance. The steppes, scarred by tracks and craters, whisper of a war machine shattered, a Red Army reborn. From the dust of 1943 rose the thunder that would roll to Berlin. The Battle of Kursk, fought in the blistering summer of 1943, was a titan clash that broke the Wehrmacht's spine and set the stage for the Red Army's march to Berlin. Its ferocity, epitomized by the legendary charge at Prokhorovka, marked a turning point in World War II, where steel, strategy, and sacrifice collided. The human stories, technological struggles, and strategic shifts reveal a battle that reshaped warfare and history. Let's explore the deeper impact, the forgotten voices, and the timeless lessons of this armored epic. The devastation at Kursk was colossal. Germany's losses, 200,000 men, 700 tanks, and 1,600 aircraft gutted its Eastern Front strength. Elite panzer divisions, like the SS Leibstandarte and Totenkopf, were reduced to husks, some with fewer than 50 operational tanks. The Soviets paid a steeper price, 800,000 casualties, 6,000 tanks, and 1,600 planes. Yet, Soviet industry, producing 12,000 tanks annually, absorbed the blow, while Germany's factories, strained by Allied bombings, faltered. The human cost was heart-wrenching. Soviet tankers, like Guards Lieutenant Alexei Petrenko, became symbols of defiance. His T-34's ramming of a Tiger at Prokhorovka, killing both crews, inspired comrades to fight on. German gunners, veterans of France and Poland, faced despair as Panthers caught fire from faulty engines. A Das Reich officer wrote, "We shoot, they burn, but their numbers never end." Civilians in Kursk's villages, like Anna Petrova, hid in root cellars as Il-2 Sturmoviks and Stukas bombed overhead, their homes reduced to ash. The technological duel was a spectacle of innovation and flaws. The Soviet T-34, with its sloped armor and diesel engine, was rugged and reliable, rolling off assembly lines at 1,000 a month. Germany's Panther, with its 75mm gun, was lethal but rushed into combat. 156 of 329 broke down by July 10th. Tigers, with 80mm cannons, dominated at range but were immobilized by mines. 8 million anti-tank mines littered the salient. SU-152 beast killers, with 152mm guns, shattered Tigers, proving Soviet ingenuity matched German engineering. Soviet strategy, masterminded by Marshal Georgy Zhukov, was a triumph of preparation. Zhukov's defense in depth, 200 miles of trenches, mines, and anti-tank guns bled the Germans white. General Konstantin Rokossovsky's Central Front and Nikolai Vatutin's Voronezh Front absorbed Citadel's fury, while Ivan Konev's Steppe Front delivered the counterpunch. Deception, like dummy airfields, misled Luftwaffe raids, with 29 of 35 June strikes hitting decoys. Zhukov's deep battle doctrine, reserving armor for massive counterstrikes, outclassed blitzkrieg. German errors were rooted in desperation. Hitler's delay of Operation Citadel from May to July, awaiting Panthers and Tigers, gave Soviets time to fortify. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, a blitzkrieg genius, warned against a frontal assault, but Hitler demanded victory. The Luftwaffe, with only 2,000 planes against 3,500 Soviet aircraft, lost air control by July 15th. German intelligence, blinded by ultraleaks, underestimated Soviet reserves, expecting 1,500 tanks, but facing 5,000. The Soviet counteroffensives were a juggernaut. Operation Kutuzov, launched July 12th, obliterated the German Ninth Army, liberating Orel by August 5th. Operation Rumyantsev, starting August 3rd, recaptured Kharkov by August 23rd, costing Germany 50,000 more men. The Red Army surged 300 miles west, seizing Smolensk and reaching the Dnieper. German panzer units down to 20% strength couldn't hold. The Kursk salient became a Soviet springboard. The myth of Prokhorovka's 50 tanks grew into legend. Soviet propaganda inflated the clash to 1,500 tanks, claiming 400 German losses. Western historians like Stephen Ambrose echoed this, dubbing it the war's greatest tank battle. Post-Cold War archives clarified 600 Soviet versus 200 German tanks, with 300 Soviet and 80 German losses. The 50 tanks, real and heroic, disrupted the SS advance, buying time for Soviet reserves to stabilize the line. Kursk's legacy lives in memory and metal. Prokhorovka's fields, now a memorial park, honor the tankers who charged into history. T-34 wrecks, preserved alongside Panthers, stand as monuments to sacrifice. The battle's lessons, preparation, resilience, and combined arms shape military doctrine today. Kursk wasn't just a victory. It was the moment the Red Army seized the war's reins, its thunder echoing to Berlin. The steps of Kursk, scarred by fire and steel, tell of a war machine shattered. Those 50 tanks, a fleeting act of defiance, symbolized Soviet resolve. From the chaos of 1943 rose a Red Army reborn, its path to victory unstoppable. Kursk was more than a battle. It was the forge where Germany's defeat was cast and the Soviet triumph was born. Survivors of the charge became living legends. Men like Sergeant William Bentley, who rallied his troop under fire, were honored with medals and public acclaim. Veterans, gathering at reunions hosted by Queen Victoria, shared stories of the valley's horrors. Yet, many struggled. Wounded troopers like Private Henry Turner faced poverty, their pensions inadequate. Their memoirs, preserved in archives, offer raw accounts of pride and pain, keeping the charge's memory alive. The charge's legacy resonates beyond Britain. It became a universal symbol of bravery against impossible odds, inspiring literature, paintings, and films. The 1936 film, The Charge of the Light Brigade, though romanticized, captured the era's spirit, while Tony Richardson's 1968 version exposed the command failures. The charge's imagery, sabers flashing, horses charging, evokes the twilight of cavalry warfare, a romantic yet doomed art in an age of rifled muskets and artillery. Militarily, the charge marked cavalry's decline. The North Valley's slaughter, with canister shot and rifles decimating the brigade, showed that mounted charges were obsolete against modern firepower. The Crimean War, with its telegraphs and railways, heralded industrialized warfare, where logistics and technology trumped tradition. Balaclava's lessons influenced tactics in the American Civil War and World War I, where cavalry gave way to trenches and tanks. The charge of the Light Brigade remains a paradox, a blunder that birthed a legend. A chain of errors sent 673 men into a maelstrom, yet their defiance turned failure into glory. In Balaclava's valley, troopers and horses, bound by duty, became immortals, their courage outshining their leaders' mistakes. This charge wasn't just a moment in the Crimean War, it was a beacon of human spirit, forever carved in the heart of history.